Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on January 28, 2022. With that, I would welcome all of you to this session, our first program for the year 2022. We are doing it over Zoom. It is our hope that future presentations can be done in person, but I think realistically we have to pay attention to hospitalization numbers and infection rates for our area, et cetera. And so obviously, as the months go along, we will try to make the right decision. If it is in person, we will, of course, ask everyone to mask when they come into the clubhouse, even though the clubhouse current protocols say, if you're fully vaccinated, you can unmask. But I think that we need to err on the side of caution. So with that, let's begin the session. Our speaker today is Bob Stone, and this is his, I believe, third presentation to our group. Bob is a lifelong educator, and most recently and still has been teaching classes online for Arlington County Schools Adult Education. And his subject today is the First Battle of Kernstown. Kernstown is near Winchester, Virginia. Which he labels as Stonewall Jackson's lone defeat. Welcome, Bob. I'm turning the stage over to you, and hopefully we'll put it on speaker view, and then you can go from here.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay. Morning, everybody. See a real sunshiny day today. We're indoors. So let me turn my share screen up here. There we go. What we're going to be talking about today is Stonewall Jackson's lone defeat. And the two gentlemen on the left is Nathan Kimball and James Shields. They are Union generals. Actually, Nathan Kimball was a colonel at the time of this battle. And then Thomas Jonathan Jackson on the right. So we're going to take a long journey here with Stonewall Jackson. This is Field Marshal Frederick Schley Roberts, who was the commanding general of the British Army into 1904. And he wrote about Stonewall Jackson. In my opinion, Stonewall Jackson was one of the greatest military geniuses the world ever saw. I will go even further than that. As a campaigner in the field, he never had a superior. In some respects, I doubt whether he ever had an equal. Well, a man that you probably recognize passed along. James Bud Robertson from Virginia Tech. He said, quote, "Jackson believed that constant drill is the key to good discipline, and that a commander's inspiration is the key to success in battle." Well, let's take a look at this. On April 27th, 1861, Thomas Jonathan Jackson joined Virginia State Militia as a colonel of infantry, and was ordered to Harper's Ferry as post commander there. On June 17, 1861, he was commissioned a brigadier general in the Confederate Army, and he would serve under General Joseph E. Johnston in the lower Shenandoah Valley. Now, the lower Shenandoah Valley is actually the northern part of the valley because the river runs north. On June 20th, 1861, in one of the most daring episodes of the Civil War, Jackson orchestrated the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad schedule so that he could capture and steal all of the railroad engines and cars that were backed up in Martinsburg, Virginia. Since there were not any railroad tracks running from Martinsburg to Strasburg, Jackson engineered a way to take the rail cars on the macadamized Valley Turnpike, the 38 miles between these 2 points. Mort Kunstler has made 2 views of this. This is the trains that were taken off at Martinsburg, and then they will move cross country down the Valley Turnpike for 38 miles. And this is as they come through Winchester. They still need to keep going because Winchester has only railroad tracks that go to Harper's Ferry. And this is the man who owns the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, President John W. Garrett. And he was pretty mad about all of this and was telegraphing the White House and the War Department and everything that something had to be done about this guy up here who was stealing his trains. Now, General Johnston was ordered to take his whole force from the Shenandoah Valley and there reinforce General Beauregard at Manassas. And of course, it was here that General Jackson received his immortal nickname, Stonewall. Shortly after the First Battle of Manassas, Jackson received his Major General's commission, and he was sent back to the lower Shenandoah Valley. Upon arrival at Winchester, he discovered that his force was almost all militia. So he requested and received his own brigade, now known as the Stonewall Brigade, the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, the 27th, and the 33rd Virginia Regiment. Jackson's orders, and this was his headquarters in Winchester, Jackson's orders were to keep the far superior army under Nathaniel Banks on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. To this goal, Jackson tried to blow up Dam Number 5 on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And he put Confederate troops on top of Maryland Heights in Harper's Ferry, even though this movement would be considered an invasion. And Richmond ordered him to recall those troops. This attempt at knocking out Dam Number 5, the sketch here was made by Captain Henry Bacon of the 18th Massachusetts Volunteers. And the view is from the Maryland side of the river. I have visited that location a couple of times, and it looks almost exactly the same as in this sketch. In early December of 1861, Jackson requested reinforcements so he could move on Bath, which we now know today as Berkeley Springs, and Hancock and Romney. The Confederate War Department sent him the brigade of Brigadier General William Wing Loring. He had one arm had been amputated, but his middle name was actually Wing. But he was operating in Western Virginia near Stanton. He was not pleased to be put under the command of a younger officer. The expedition started on January 1st, 1862, with very good weather. But by the second day, sleet and snow in the mountains made the march a nightmare for both men and animals. And again, a Kunstler picture of this operation in the dead of winter, starting out on New Year's Day. Now, the campaign map for this, Jackson men were in Winchester, and they would come up what is now 522 through Pootown and Blue&Gray and Unger's Store, and here's Bath, which is Berkeley Springs. They would drive out the Federals that were here at Bath and drive them back across the river to Hancock. He had General Lander was in charge of the Union troops in Hancock, and Stonewall Jackson demanded his surrender. And Lander sort of answered his plea by telling him to go to hell. So Jackson then backed off, came back down to Unger's Store, and then down to Romney. Now, Jackson was in command of the whole force, and he received a new brigadier general to be the Stonewall commander. And that man is Brigadier General Richard Brooke Garnett. Now, there is some controversy about the photo. It could be his cousin, Richard, though we don't really know, or cousin Robert, excuse me, really know. There's two pictures that say that this is Richard Brooke Garnett. During the march through the snow and the sleet, Garnett let his men pull off the march so they could rest and eat. Jackson rode up to Garnett and asked him why his men were not marching. And Garnett explained that the circumstances, they were hungry and they were tired. Jackson told Garnett to get his men in line. And as he was riding away, Jackson said something to the effect that the men never complained of being tired or hungry when he was their commander. Now, Jackson set up headquarters in Romney. This is the headquarters today. It's a good day for snow. After taking and holding Romney, Jackson ordered his brigade back to Winchester, but told Loring to stay in Romney with his brigade throughout the winter months. Loring and his subordinate officers signed a petition for the War Department requesting to be relieved of their assignment with Jackson so they could go back to their previous assignments. Secretary of War Benjamin approved that request and sent instructions for Jackson to carry them out. Now, Judah Benjamin started off as the Secretary of War. He would eventually be the Secretary of State. He didn't do a very good job as Secretary of War. Jackson obeyed Benjamin's orders and then promptly wrote out his resignation from the Army and gave it to his good friend, Congressman Butler from Shepherdstown, Virginia, who was traveling to Richmond. In his resignation letter, Jackson stated that, quote, "With such interference in my command, I cannot be expected to be of much service in the field," unquote. Mr. Butler held on to Jackson's resignation until he could talk to the Virginia Governor Letcher and the ranking general Joseph E. Johnston. With the urging of these three friends, Jackson withdrew his resignation, but he also filed court-martial papers on General Loring. The War Department would strip Loring of his command and send him to the Western Theater of the War. However, Jackson would retain all of Loring's forces and consolidate them into the Valley Army. In late January, Jackson reestablished his headquarters in Winchester in the Fuller House on Braddock Street, just a short walk to Reverend Graham's house, where he and his wife, Mariana, were living. This is a poor picture, excuse me, of Frederick Lander, but he was the commander of the Union forces around Hancock, and he moved into Virginia to try to corral Jackson. But on March 2nd, 1862, while a snowstorm raged across northwestern Virginia, Union Brigadier General Frederick West Lander lay dying of pneumonia in Paw Paw, Virginia. His health was broken by the winter campaign against Stonewall Jackson. Colonel Nathan Kimball was placed in temporary command of Lander's 11,000-man division, and he was given orders to report to Martinsburg, Virginia, to meet their new commander, Brigadier General James Shields. Those were the two federal officers on the title page. And Major General Nathaniel Banks had a 25,000-man army on the other side of the Potomac River, and he was ordered to cross it into Virginia and then join with Shields at Martinsburg. Once consolidated, this army was to move southward up the Shenandoah Valley to eliminate any threat in that region. Once the small Confederate force of Jackson was eliminated, General Banks was ordered to cross the Blue Ridge Mountains and join Major General George B. McClellan's Army of Potomac for the Peninsula Campaign. Well, this man we all know, but at the time this was occurring, he was the military advisor to the president of the Confederacy. And he was trying to move Confederate forces around like pieces on a chessboard to counter McClellan's grand plans for an attack on Richmond. One small piece of the puzzle was Jackson's 4,800-man Army of the Valley, which consisted of 3 small brigades, 11 Virginia regiments, 4 artillery batteries, and Turner Ashby's cavalry. Lee's orders to Jackson were to be active so that the Union forces would have to keep more of Banks' army in the Shenandoah Valley and away from McClellan. On the evening of March 10th, 1862, Jackson called his brigade and regimental commanders to his office on Braddock Street for a council of war. Jackson wanted to get the opinions of these men on a bold strike against the Union forces, but his commanders all voiced major concerns with the plan. After the meeting ended, Jackson told his medical director, Hunter McGuire, quote, "This was the last council of war I will ever hold." and he held to that. On March 11th, 1862, Jackson's forces retreated south out of Winchester to Mount Jackson, when Banks's whole force moved to Winchester. By the way, some people think that Mount Jackson was named after Stonewall, but it was actually named after Andrew Jackson. This put Jackson's force almost 40 miles south of Winchester. Banks decided that Jackson was not a threat at Mount Jackson, so he ordered James Shields to stay at Winchester while the main army moved east over the Blue Ridge. Shields would divide his division with half of it 3 miles north of Winchester and the other half 3 miles south. Shields had part of his southern force behind a small hill called Pritchard's Knob. And the photographer is standing up on the little hill at Kernstown on the Pritchard farm. You can see the beginning of the Alleghenies in the far, far distance. This ridge here is called Sandy Ridge, and it was a major part of the battle here. And then over here was mostly where the artillery was, because it's an excellent spot for artillery. Colonel Turner Ashby's Confederate cavalry was trying to observe all the moves that Banks' army was making and report these to Jackson. Ashby's cavalry missed seeing the 5,500 men north of Winchester and only saw about half the remaining men south of Winchester. Ashby gave this false information to Jackson, who in turn used it to order the men back to Winchester to take on the small, what they thought, Union force. They would have 2 days of hard marching before reaching Kernstown early on March 23rd, 1862. The evening prior to Jackson's arrival with the infantry, Ashby and his cavalry tested the Union lines. In this skirmish, the Union commander, General Shields, was badly wounded while directing a Union artillery battery. Shields was taken back to Winchester for medical treatment of his broken arm and other injuries to his shoulder and side. Since Shields was in no condition to command at the front, he named his top colonel, Nathan Kimball, as the field commander for the coming battle. The morning of March 23rd was cold with a chill wind blowing from the west. Colonel Kimball's brigade had slept on the frozen ground right around here by the Cedar Creek Pike and the Valley Turnpike connect, right where the toll gate is on the Valley Turnpike. The other two brigades, the Sullivan Brigade and Tyler's Brigade, were north of Winchester. Winchester's up this way. Kernstown at this time, it was a unincorporated city, but not in Winchester. Today they have been eaten up by Winchester, so it's just another part of Winchester. Also, this terrain map was drawn by Jedediah Hotchkiss, and the Blue and Gray editor David E. Roth put in the boxes, but this is the contour map that Hotchkiss made. Kernstown, Virginia was a typical Shenandoah Valley town. It was mostly open fields with small ridges here and there and numerous stone fences showing the limestone deposits in the area. One of the biggest farms belonged to the Pritchard family and encompassed about 400 acres. On this property, there's a patch of high ground called Pritchard's Knob, which is a couple of 100 feet higher than the farmland. In addition, the Pritchards had a stone wall that extended from the Valley Turnpike on over to the Middle Road. Another farm property sat west of the Pritchard farm, and this property had a long ridge, which is Sandy Ridge. Another farm property, had running north and south with about 100 feet higher than the Pritchard Knob. Sandy Ridge is a good artillery position, as is Pritchard's Knob. South of Pritchard's farm was an old stone Opequon Presbyterian church. This is a photo taken right after the troops had gone. It was burned, and it had a lot of artillery shells stuck in it. This was no man's land between the dueling artillery. You'll see the rebuilt Opequon Presbyterian Church as it stands right on the same spot. They've expanded it, but they see the window stuff here and the same window treatment this way. So they just built a new one behind that. Shortly after sunrise, Colonel Kimball ordered the 8th Ohio to move out and serve as skirmishers. And he especially wanted these men to check Sandy Ridge to the west for any sign of Confederates in the area. Colonel Samuel S. Carroll commanded half of the 8th Ohio, and this force moved into the area around the church. That's Sam Carroll, while Lieutenant Colonel Frank Sawyer commanded the other half of the 8th Ohio, and they would go and check out Sandy Ridge. Suddenly, there was movement on the Valley Turnpike. The Confederate horse artillery of Turner Ashby's cavalry, under the command of Captain R. Preston Chew, had returned and were now preparing to open fire on Colonel Carroll's troops near the church. At about the same time, Lieutenant Colonel Sawyer rode ahead of his troops and spotted Confederate cavalry coming up Sandy Ridge. These Southern troopers were under the command of Major Oliver Funston. A short distance behind Ashby's cavalry, 4 companies of the Stonewall Brigade were advancing. From his headquarters on Pritchard's Knob, Colonel Kimball spotted this activity, and he immediately sent reinforcements to Colonel Carroll, the 14th Indiana, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William Harrow. Before these reinforcements, there's William Harrow. The colonel had already called for a retreat to Pritchard's Knob, and Colonel Sawyer joined in the retrograde movement. Colonel Kimball also called up 2 batteries of artillery and placed them on Pritchard's Knob. The 1st West Virginia Light Artillery Battery A, under the command of Captain John Jinks, and the 4th U.S. Artillery Battery E, under the command of Captain Joseph Clark. Colonel Kimball brought forward the 67th Ohio and the 84th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiments to support these 2 batteries. And he sent word back to Colonel Jeremiah C. Sullivan, who was north of Winchester, had one of 2 brigades to prepare south and come down to Kernstown, 39th Illinois, 13th Indiana, and the 5th, 67th, and 66th Ohio. And this is Colonel Jeremiah Sullivan. Took me a long time to find that picture. Both sides opened fire with their artillery. George Neese of Chew's battery wrote, quote, "The artillery fire now became terrific. Hundreds of shells went just over our heads, howling and shrieking in the air like demons on the way to deal death and destruction." 2 miles south of Kernstown, Stonewall Jackson's infantry was marching at a rapid pace of 3 miles per hour to the sounds of the artillery battle. But many of the men had already fallen out of line and lay prostrate along the Valley Turnpike because they had just marched 40 miles in 2 days. Only about 3,000 of Jackson's 4,800 would participate in this fight because they were worn out. Jackson had ridden forward to confer with Colonel Ashby, and Ashby assured the general that there were only 4 Union regiments in the area, as the rest of Shields' division had left the valley. Now, Jackson never liked to fight on Sundays, but circumstances demanded a quick battle over a small Union force before they could be reinforced. Jackson rode up coming up the Valley Pike and conferring with Ashby. A member of the Stonewall Brigade wrote, quote, "Military men don't tell us privates their plan, and General Jackson never told his officers either." So with the terrain information that Colonel Ashby provided, Jackson hastily made an attack plan. The plan called for this infantry to seize the high ground on Sandy Ridge and the artillery to join them on the ridge. Ashby was given the job of blocking the Valley Turnpike. Sandy Ridge was an excellent spot for the Southern artillery because it was higher than Pritchard's Knob, where the Union artillery was located. Jackson, a master artillery officer in the Mexican War, wanted his artillery to drive off the enemy artillery, and then he would send his infantry on a flank march to drive the enemy away. So you're going to have the Valley Pike being cut off by Ashby's men and the horse artillery, whereas the field artillery wants to come up on the Sandy Ridge. And once the artillery here drives off the Federal artillery, then the Confederate troops would come around on a flank attack up on Cedar Creek Road. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Jackson chose the small brigade of Colonel Samuel V. Fulkerson, who had the 23rd and the 37th Virginia to take control of Sandy Ridge. Never could find a picture of Samuel Vance Fulkerson. This is a sketch that someone had in a book. Stonewall Jackson had also ordered Brigadier General Richard B. Garnett to get the Stonewall Brigade in place to make the flanking attack. Several companies of Ashby's cavalry under the command of Major Funston would join with Garnett's forces. Jackson pulled the 5th Virginia out of the attacking force and added it to the 42nd Virginia under Colonel Jesse Burks and designated them as the reserve on the southern slope of Sandy Ridge. Now, Colonel Kimball established a line of communications through a series of wigwag stations. That's the flags that you communicate with. And he was setting up to his commander, James Shields. General Shields would direct general movements from his bed, but Colonel Kimball would make all the tactical field operations. Based on Colonel Kimball's information, General Shields had his last infantry brigade, the 7th Indiana, the 7th Ohio, the 29th Ohio, the 110th Pennsylvania, and the 1st West Virginia, move from the north of Winchester to support Kimball's line. These men would be under the command of Erasmus Tyler. There's Erasmus Tyler. Somewhere around noon, Jackson ordered Colonel Fulkerson to begin his movement to capture Sandy Ridge. Fulkerson's men were here in the middle, the 23rd and 37th, and they would move onto the hill and try to secure that for the Confederates. Fulkerson's men veered off to the west to get out of the line of fire of the Union artillery on Pritchard's Knob. The Stonewall Brigade was following Fulkerson's men. There's Garnett with the Stonewall Brigade, and they would be moving in this way. As the head of the column of the 37th Virginia came out of a wood line, they found that they would have to cross an open field approximately 3/4 of a mile wide before they could advance up Sandy Ridge. The Union artillery on Pritchard's Knob would have a wide open shot, these Confederate soldiers. Jackson rode up to Fulkerson and ordered him to turn the enemy's artillery batteries, knowing full well that in order to do so would mean that Fulkerson's men would have to run the gauntlet of the same gun. Jackson brought forward 2 guns of Carpenter's battery to help Fulkerson achieve his objective. One of these guns fired a shot into the Pritchard barn where there were Union sharpshooters. And it delighted Jackson so much that he clapped his hands and said, "Good, good." Fulkerson describes his ordeal getting across the open ground. The advance was a good deal retarded, but steady. The enemy all while throwing shell and shot into our column with great rapidity, unquote. To make matters worse, Captain Lucius Robinson's 6-gun smoothbore battery L of the 1st Light Artillery, 1st Ohio Light Artillery, was wheeling into position on the middle road with the 8th Ohio. Here's Robinson's battery here. They would have really good line of fire down the middle road as these troops crossing the middle road. The 2 leading regiments of the Stonewall Brigade to run the gauntlet of the Union artillery south of the Sandy Ridge were the 33rd Virginia under Colonel Cummings and the 2nd Virginia under Colonel J.W. Allen. Both came under a heavy fire from the Union artillery. As the 4th Virginia started to run the gauntlet, their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Ronalds, got hoarse, got spooked by the many exploding shells, and it ran with wild abandon, eventually throwing Ronald off his back and seriously injuring the colonel. All this action occurred before the Valley Army had faced any Union infantry. During the Confederate advance, Colonel Kimball was taking action to protect his western flank. And so when Colonel Erasmus Tyler's 3rd Brigade had just come on the field, Kimball asked them to move down the Cedar Creek Grade Road instead of coming into this area here. So they would have Sullivan's men and then Kimball's men, and now they're going to get Tyler to come down this road. All this action before the Valley Army had fired it and shot. Colonel Tyler yelled out to his men, quote, "Boys, put on your bayonets. You will need them," unquote. Despite the heavy artillery fire concentrated upon the Confederate infantry and artillery in their attempt to gain control of Sandy Ridge, casualties were relatively light in the Southern ranks. Jackson had gotten 8 regiments of infantry and 3 batteries of artillery on Sandy Ridge, and he was preparing for his planned flank attack on the enemy troops on Pritchard's farm. Colonel Tyler's Union Brigade had redirected themselves at about 2 p.m., so they're making this going west and then making a turn down to go to Sandy Ridge at 2 o'clock. The 7th Ohio Infantry was leading the regiment of Tyler's charge, with the 7th Indiana, the 1st Virginia, USA, the 110th Pennsylvania, and the 29th Ohio following in their footsteps. And you see these regiments here is Tyler. This is the famous Stonewall at Kernstown in an 1880 view. Photographers standing where the Union attack started about 2 p.m. The 37th Virginia would be behind the wall right in this area, and the wall goes up the hill, and then drops off and goes around the hill. So it's not a type like we have at Fredericksburg, where it's pretty well flat. This isn't going uphill, but the 37th Virginia would use this wall to protect themselves against the 7th Ohio. When the 7th Ohio went up a ravine, and then they went up a different slope, and then when they got halfway up the slope, the 37th Virginia popped up from behind the stone wall and gave them a volley of musketry that stopped the Union attack. The 37th Virginia had won the race to the stone wall, and now there was space to the right flank for the rest of Jackson's regiments to connect. But where were the men from the Stonewall Brigade? Jackson had selected Francis B. Jones, a major in the 2nd Virginia, to be a special aide for delivering orders from Jackson. But this selection caused a situation where the regimental commanders in the Stonewall Brigade were receiving orders from Jackson and from Jones and from their brigade commander all at the same time. One man was getting thoroughly confused, was General Garnett. His first orders were to support Fulkerson's men. Next, he received an order to lead the 33rd Virginia Regiment to the firing line behind the stone wall. Next, he was told to bring his whole brigade to the firing line. And last, he received an order that Jackson wanted the 5th Virginia to move back into reserve. This is one of Jackson's aide-de-camps, Sandy Pendleton. Sandy Pendleton went up on a small knoll where he could see the whole Union force. He counted all the regimental and brigade flags, and then went to Jackson to report that there were more than 10,000 Union troops already on the battlefield. Jackson told Pendleton, quote, "Say nothing about it, but we are in for it now," unquote. That's the name of one of the books that was written about this fight. We get back to the map. The Confederate regiments along the Stonewall were all mixed together in the order of their arrival. So you have some Stonewall with Fulkerson, and you have some Fulkerson's men over with Garnett. Fulkerson took command of the western side of the ridge, and Brigadier General Garnett took command of the men on the eastern side of the ridge. Because the stone wall went up and over the ridge, the Confederates on the left side of the hill could not see their compatriots on the right side of the hill, vice versa. At about 4 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Alvin C. Boris of the 67th Ohio in Kimball's brigade reported that, quote, "To our right front, behind a ridge and somewhat scattered trees, the rattle of infantry broke with such fury that the report of small arms appeared as one continuous crash." Now that Tyler's brigade had engaged the enemy on Sandy Ridge, Colonel Kimball prepared his brigade for the flank attack that would break the Confederate line. So you see Kimball's men will start to move, and they will be coming in to the flank of this stone wall. Now that Tyler's brigade had engaged the enemy on Sandy Ridge, Colonel Kimball prepared his brigade for the flank attack that would break the Confederate line. With the 67th Ohio, the 84th Pennsylvania, and half of the 5th Ohio, the other half was protecting Pritchard's Knob, Kimball's men slammed into the right flank and rear of the Confederates behind the stone wall. Just before Kimball's attack, General Garnett could see that many of his men on the right of the stone wall were running out of ammunition, and he knew that wagon trains bringing the ammunition were far to the rear. Garnett was hoping that the coming sunset would allow his men to retreat from the heavy pressure on his flank. When Garnett checked to see if General Jackson was close by, he was told that Jackson had left Sandy Ridge to get his reserve regiment, the 5th Virginia, into the fight. As Jackson's second in command and a senior brigade commander, General Garnett made the difficult decision to pull his men back in an orderly retreat. This decision would bring about the greatest personal crisis of Garnett's life. Garnett sent word down the stone wall to his men, but the message stopped at the crest of Sandy Ridge and did not make it over to Colonel Fulkerson. So Colonel Fulkerson's men were fighting a few minutes more before they realized that they were being attacked from the rear. General Jackson ordered the 5th Virginia to reinforce the stone wall, and he rode forward with these troops. All of a sudden, Jackson saw his front line troops running away from the wall. Jackson halted one soldier and asked him, quote, "Where are you going?" The man yelled back that he was looking for ammunition. Jackson screamed, quote, "Then go back and give them the bayonet." Jackson then grabbed a young drummer boy and told him to beat the rally, but his message went unheeded as the Valley Army continued to retreat. General Jackson saw General Garnett riding toward him, and he yelled out, "Why have you not rallied your men? Halt and rally." Garnett immediately set himself to the task, but the rearward momentum was too great to stem with words. Jackson finally made the decision to retreat from Kernstown at about 7:30 p.m. and head south. He ordered the 5th Virginia and the 42nd Virginia to be the rear guard. Casualties were very high for such a small battle early in the war. Confederates lost 420 men killed and wounded, and 262 taken prisoner. This was a casualty rate of 25% for Jackson's forces. The 4th Virginia had 37% casualty rate, and the 2nd Virginia had a 33% casualty rate because they took the brunt of the fighting at the wall. Federal casualties were 568 killed or wounded and 22 captured, but because they had a much larger force, it was only an 8% casualty rate. Both Union commanders, General Shields and Colonel Kimball, would take credit for Stonewall Jackson's only battlefield defeat. At the Battle of Fredericksburg, General Nathan Kimball, his brigade was the first to charge the Stonewall at Fredericksburg. James Shields, because of his injury, got out of the Army and went back to his life. Now, even though Jackson's Valley Army was defeated and forced to retreat, they met the expectation that President Davis' military advisor, Robert E. Lee, had for them. Because of this little fight, President Lincoln made the decision to withhold General Banks' army closer to Washington and the Shenandoah Valley, rather than sending them to General McClellan's army mobilizing on the Virginia Peninsula. The Valley Army rested along the Valley Turnpike the night of March 23rd. General Jackson sat alone at a campfire, pondering the gains and losses of the battle. He was very disappointed in the performance of Colonel Ashby's cavalry. Half of Ashby's men, about 300, had disappeared before the battle to visit their close-by homes and didn't make it back to the army until after the battle. Ashby did not take any disciplinary action against these men. He also failed to do a thorough reconnaissance of the Union forces, and this led Jackson to believe that he was facing about the same number as his own army. Jackson would discipline Ashby by withholding a brigadier generalship that had been approved for him, but he also had a heart-to-heart talk with Ashby about the lack of discipline in his cavalry. Ashby would get his brigadier general star just before losing his life in a skirmish at Harrisonburg, Virginia in early June of 1860. Most of Jackson's ire came down on this man and his leadership or lack thereof of the Stonewall Brigade. 8 days after the Battle of First Kernstown, Jackson would have Garnett arrested and court-martialed in what historian Robert K. Crick calls, quote, Army of Northern Virginia's most notorious court-martial, unquote. Jackson would allege 7 charges against Garnett, all of them under the basic heading of neglect of duty. The first 5 charges were almost the same thing, how Garnett handled the regiment along the stone wall. The last 2 charges were more serious, that Garnett did give the order to fall back when he should have encouraged his command to hold its position, and that Garnett ordered the reserve regiment, the 5th Virginia, to retreat, notwithstanding the regiment had not yet been brought into action, and he should have continued in advance to the enemy. General Garnett asked for an expedited trial, but the Valley Army was going on what it's famous for as the 1862 Shenandoah Valley campaign, so trial was delayed. While waiting for his trial, General Charles Winder was named commander of the Stonewall Brigade. Garnett wrote a long letter to Adjutant General Samuel Cooper in Richmond, dated June 20th, 1862, in which he answered every one of Jackson's charges. In his letter, Garnett said, I was kept in profound ignorance of his plans, instructions, and intentions as the humblest private in the army. After numerous delays because of the war, General Garnett finally got his court-martial proceeding on August 6, 1862, at the headquarters of General Richard Ewell in Orange Courthouse. The first and only witness called by the court on the first day was Major General T.J. Jackson. General Garnett personally questioned Jackson with no holds barred, getting him to admit that he, Jackson, did not share his plans for the battle, and that Colonel Ashby had given incorrect information, which culminated in the defeat. On the second day of the trial, the only witness called was Jackson's aide-de-camp, Sandy Pendleton, who had written his father a few days before the trial, quote, "The case will most probably go by default in favor of Garnett," unquote. The trial was never completed, as Jackson was ordered on August 7th to take his wing of the army to Culpeper and engage the Union force. This action led to the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Robert E. Lee ended the whole episode by releasing Garnett from arrest and assigning him to James Longstreet's wing of the army as a brigade commander under George Pickett. Richard B. Garnett was killed in action during Pickett's charge on July 3rd, 1863, riding his horse into the battle. The horse came back to the Confederate line, but Garnett's body was never found. He is most likely buried in Hollywood Cemetery with all the unknowns that were reinterred, transported to Richmond. After another oddity in this tale, Pickett's division was returning to the main army when the body of Stonewall Jackson was brought by train to Richmond. Pickett's division was designated to be the military honor guard, and General Richard B. Garnett was named an honorary pallbearer. Garnett said of this honor, quote, "I believe he did me a great injustice, but I also believe that he acted from the purest motive. He is dead. Who can fill this place?" Now, I want to bring you a little bit up to date on the preservation of that battlefield. This is the wartime Pritchard House, just like you have the one here at the Wilderness. The Kernstown Battlefield Association owns all of the Pritchard property, and a nonprofit other place owns Sandy Ridge. There hasn't been any connection between the Pritchard property and Sandy Ridge, but I understand that now they're trying to make that connection so that you can get to see the whole battle there. And this is down the hill there, the knob. Their barn is a museum with a lot of artillery pieces in there. Really small ones for mountain howitzers and stuff, and then large artillery. And then they built a brand new conference center, and they have a store there and everything. And they give tours into the house now. And they do set it up similar to Elwood with the hospital motif. So just wanted to show you what it looks like. All right, let me stop sharing. Are there any questions?
There are no questions posted on the chat feature. Has anyone with questions? Please unmute and ask your questions.
I've got one.
Bob Johnson. Excellent.
Excellent presentation, Bob. I'm not very familiar with Kernstown. Where is it again?
It's right along I-81. The main road that's off I-81 is Route 11, the Valley Turnpike. It's in the southern area of Winchester. A lot of buildup there, a lot of industries and stuff right around that battlefield. But once you get on the battlefield itself, you feel you can't hear it, you can't see it. All that other stuff is just you can't hear any of the traffic and everything of that type. And they even built a big shopping center right outside the gate of the Kernstown battlefield. It's as I said, the Kernstown Battlefield Association is private individuals formed by themselves. And when that farm was up for sale, they raised the money. And now they're raising the money to do the improvements to the house and to build the barns and stuff. It's a wonderful organization.
It looks to be about maybe 5 to 8 or so miles south of the intersection of Route 81 and Route 1750. So in other words, it's north of the 6681 interchange.
Yes, it's if you're familiar with Winchester, that has a route number 37 that goes around Winchester to the west and comes off of 81, and then it goes all the way around and comes back on 81 to the north. And you take that exit, Route 37, and then immediately take the Valley Turnpike. And they have the little, you ride through the little village before you see the sign to go into the Battlefield Association. I'd be more than willing, if we want to have a tour sometime, we'll take you up.
It's a good thought. Yes, Greg.
Hey.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This question is to Bob. I had read a book, I guess I was in college, having to do with Stonewall Jackson. And because the man was a deacon to a Presbyterian church there, he was very, very he didn't have a whole lot of people that he made his plans with. But according to this book I read, he only trusted those people that were Presbyterians and only those people. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I don't know if there's any validity is there to that. And I was just going to ask you, is that true that he only held his counsel to those people that were of his own religious faith?
Interesting.
Well, he had on his staff, he had people that he knew in Lexington, and most of them were Presbyterians. And so those are the people that after that one time when he had a council of war and never did it again, the people that he talked with in private with his staff.
Right.
He would not tell Dick Ewell, who was a really excellent division commander, said that he was as mad as a hare because Jackson left him sitting up on top of the mountain and went on to McDowell and didn't tell him what he was going to be doing. And he was very upset, as Garnett was. Now, the other thing was that he didn't like to fight on Sunday. And the church that was right past this, where they had their artillery, was a Presbyterian church.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have thought that it was a double whammy there. He didn't want to fight on Sunday, and he didn't want to have the Presbyterian church damaged, but it did burn down, other than the outer wall.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes,
Jack?
Yes, may I pose a question? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jack, I am off mute, right? Okay, there we go. I've missed a couple of details of your presentation, which was very interesting today. First of all, I'm not sure how many total Confederates or Union were engaged in the battle.
Okay.
And then I'm wondering also if you can return to one of your maps and show us the location of that of the church.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then finally, and more substantive, I guess, is whether you believe Garnett's court-martial was justified.
No, and that's why Robert K. Crick calls it one of the Northern Virginia Army worst type of court-martial. Jackson just was not. I think that Jackson has changed for this battle, changed his way to do a battle. He doesn't stay in here at Kernstown. He was in the rear, and he was sending forces forward. In almost all the other battles he put in, he's in the front, and he's not letting people in the front have a retreat. There's not going to be any retreat with Jack. Let me call up this.
Good people do learn from their mistakes, I guess.
Oh yes. Let's see. So now, what was the question on the church?
Where the church is on the map, maybe.
Okay.
21.
Right.
Show us where it is. Slide 21. Show us where it is.
Right. The church is right here, Opequon. It's hidden in this, and the picture that I have here you would be looking this way, straight north.
Yes.
And that's where the Pritchard farm is.
Thank you.
And west goes that way.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, and the second question was, how many on each side were engaged? How many troops on each side were engaged total in?
Okay.
In battle?
Well, Jackson had only about 3,000 of his 4,800 men there.
Okay.
Because they were straggling up the Valley Pike. The Shields's division was one of the strongest or had many more soldiers in it than a normal division. He had 3 brigades and they totaled 11,000 men. So the 3 brigades all made it into this fight, whereas 2 brigades had been sent up north of Winchester. And Shields actually did that, trying to draw Jackson in. And so he was very successful with that maneuver.
Okay.
But that was, I think it was 568 casualties out of the 11,000 men that the Shields had.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Good.
And then, Bob, just so you'll know, maybe you can see it yourself, but on the chat screen, there were 2 indications, at least, of an interest in a tour. So that obviously is something we might want to look into.
Yeah.
So news.
Now they are like Elwood. They will open up in the middle of April and have the weekends open.
Mhm.
Every weekend from April through middle October.
Yeah. Okay.
And they have some of the people there that will be able to give us a really good tour.
Ah, well, that's good to know. All right. Well, are there any other questions? So what we will do is make this recording available for review, and also other people actually take a look at the recording, and then also we'll post any information on a possible trip to Kernstown. Okay.
Good.
Well, with that, we will end the presentation, and thank you very much for attending, and we will be in touch with regards to our February presentation, which is being given by John Hennessy, lately retired from the National Park Service. If you visit the programs page of our website, you'll see what his subject matter is, and it promises to be of great interest to most everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.